Hello, and welcome to the North Coast Journal Preview. This is a show where we take a look at the current edition of the North Coast Journal. My name is Matt Knight, and I will be your host for today. And as usual, we are joined by the news editor of the North Coast Journal, Thad Greenson, and the arts and features editor of the North Coast Journal, Jennifer Fumiko Cahill. Welcome, guys.
Hey, Matt.
How you doing?
I'm doing all right, but what happened to the sun? I mean, Monday,
the 4th, and it just said it had done its job and went away.
What a tease.
Okay, I'm going to be honest. It's my fault.
Oh.
This week we have a story about gardening in the rotten weather, in the sunless gloom.
Mm-hmm.
And our freelancer Julia Graham-Witt was concerned that it would no longer be relevant when it came out. So I'm sorry, I took away the sun.
Well, bring it back.
We'll see, Matt. We'll see.
I would just say if our coverage really had that power, I think the world would look a little bit different. But
so true.
Thad, there just needs to be a little something extra in our envelope this month. Well, I think we should just crack on, gloom notwithstanding, and take a look at what's on the cover of the North Coast Journal this week.
So on the cover itself is an amazing image done by Heidi Beltran from our production department. And she has made this incredible image that I'm pretty sure we're going to see tattooed on people's backs. It's very cool. It's these black snakes. This black snake is winding through a cannabis plant with a sort of, bleeding dry river below. And it is speaking to the metaphor. The cover is titled Black Snakes, and it is a excerpt from Caitlin Reed's nonfiction book about the indigenous fight against illegal cannabis grows. How it's called Settler Cannabis. Sorry, I should say. And it is about how the green rush is kind of another leg of a constant settler assault on indigenous people and indigenous land using extractive economies, extractive businesses, whether it's pulling oil out of pipelines, whether it's, the stealing of land, the stealing of people and labor, or, the destruction of land by trespass grows, which is a big problem, and particularly something that the Yurok tribe has been grappling with.
Yeah. Now, I think this article speaks to the green rush and the effects of that on tribal lands. And the one thing I didn't, if I'm not recalling, is has there been any lessening of this sort of activity, or is it just gone on straight through from the green rush to the depression that's currently happening in the grow market?
Well, Caitlin Reed, who actually is a professor in the Native American Studies department at Cal Poly Humboldt, addresses it in terms of how the trespass grows are cleaned up and about their effects, not so much as a tracking of what's changed since legalization. There might be some address of that elsewhere in the book, which does also tackle some really interesting things about like the Back to the Land movement, and that how that is viewed through an indigenous lens, like back to the land that was stolen from indigenous people. It's an interesting look, a perspective that we don't always see in mainstream publications. So it's a really rich text, and I strongly urge anybody who's interested to read up on it. And it goes way, way back in history. So in fact, when Reed talks about black snakes, she was talking about being on a trespass grow and cleaning up, right? Getting her hands dirty and going and pulling out all this black tubing that they use to irrigate when they divert water from the river. And of course, river water diversion is, a massive environmental problem, partly because of the draining of the river, because of the waste and the pollution that goes back into the river. and the effects on the wildlife and in particular the salmon population. And Reed talks about how salmon and other elements of, flora and fauna are referred to as the more than human relatives. And the devastating feeling of watching a fish kill or something like that, which for, most non-native people, it appears as a tragic ecological disaster. But I mean, it doesn't even come close to the relationship of a more than human relative. But consider dogs, right? Consider how we would feel if this was hundreds or thousands of dogs, animals that we feel really emotionally close to. It's not the same relationship, but it's a step toward understanding the emotional devastation and the cultural devastation. But more than that, the salmon has an impact on how Native culture is transmitted from one generation to another, how it's enacted. And so Reed talks about the attack on the land, the attack on the ecosystem, and on the salmon as being an attack on Native culture and Native people. And the black snakes that she refers to as, the black tubing, also link up with a really interesting, I believe it's a Sioux narrative. And she quotes Nick Estes, who wrote a book called Our History is the Future, Standing Rock versus the Dakota Access Pipeline. And in it, there's a prophecy referred to of a giant black snake that rises and that the people have to battle for their own survival, for the survival of the earth. And Reed kind of connects that idea to the idea of these black snakes and what other black snakes do we have to battle in our community. And it's I felt like it was a really great perspective and one that we don't often hear. We hear about river health and we hear about illegal grows, but we don't hear about the kind of direct link between illegal grows and other damage of colonialism.
I thought it was really eye-opening in that even I think for people who have had their eyes wide open to kind of the environmental devastation that has come with the green rush and wide-scale, especially illicit cannabis cultivation in Humboldt, I think folks would have seen that as a very different thing than the access pipeline. And the Standing Rock fight, and I think linking them is just a really changed my perspective in looking at some of these issues locally and how they carried out. And I just wanted to dovetail on one thing that Jen said is I think it was also very eye-opening for me to read Caitlin's kind of recounting of some of the impacts on cultural resources, not just through the dewatering of streams and whatnot, but she noted kind of that a lot of these trespass grows or even grows on private property took place on the margins of either reservations or obviously in ancestral territory, but along rivers and streams and watersheds, and in some of the same areas that certain native plants used for cultural activities like basket weaving and stuff like that grew, and to the point that it made it really hard for some tribal members to go out and collect the traditional materials that they would use for basket weaving and other things due to fear for their own safety. And so that's just kind of an ancillary impact that I had never considered before reading this.
It's quite the terrifying metaphor. Mm-hmm. Any last thoughts on this before we move on?
I just really urge everybody to give it a read. And if you are, moved by it or interested in, and I think a lot of people are going to be very intrigued by this, to say again that the rest of the book holds so much. It was, Thad and I went back and forth when we were trying to pick an excerpt, and this was the portion that, Caitlin recommended as sort of a general overview to a perspective. But there was so much in it that we were flipping through and we were just like, well, what about this part? And what about that part? And there's just a lot. There's a lot to find in there. And it's an excellent read. It's not terrifyingly academic in that way.
Yeah.
Well, I suggest people read the article as an introduction to the book. And, get intrigued and find out more by reading the whole thing.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's move on to some news. Thad, I think you have some news for us horse racing fans.
Yeah, kind of a continuation of a story that's been going on for the last couple of weeks. But at an emergency meeting last week, the Humboldt County Board of Supervisors voted unanimously with Supervisor Mike Wilson absent to approve $1 million in emergency funding for a temporary fix for the Humboldt County Fairgrounds grandstands. So they were damaged in the December 20th earthquake. And following the quake, the county had ordered inspection, a seismic inspection, to just kind of see if anything had been damaged and what the seismic integrity of all of the fairgrounds structures was. And the firm that did the consulting firm came back and said that there was significant damage to the roof of the grandstands at the fairgrounds at the racetrack, and said that it's not in any danger of collapse on a normal day, but in the event of another significant earthquake, it would be in very real danger of a catastrophic collapse. And so really left the Humboldt County Fair Association, just a month out from the first day of the fair, trying to figure out what to do. And as I said, the temporary fix is not cheap. It's $1 million just to reinforce the structure so it's safely inhabitable for the time being. But then it sounds like that temporary fix won't really go toward a permanent fix, and so then they will have to afterwards figure out how to kind of permanently retrofit and shore up the structure. And so the fair was really left with the choice of either trying to find $1 million, which they didn't have, to shore up the structure in the short term, or to basically cancel horse racing at the fair. There's some talk about doing racing without anybody in the stands, and having people in kind of standing room only around the track, but they didn't feel like that was viable. So they went to the Board of Supervisors, and while 5th District Supervisor Steve Madrone and 4th District Supervisor Natalie Arroyo, expressed some pretty real concerns about the county's finances, the board ultimately voted to take $1 million that had already been appropriated for construction projects but not spent some years back, and to kind of reappropriate those to fixing up the fairgrounds. And so now the question really is, can this construction firm that they've hired get this done in the next 4 weeks? So that I think the opening day of the fair is August 5th. And races are starting shortly after that. So the clock is very much ticking.
The race is on.
The race is very good. I think the thought behind it was that this is such an economic driver for the Fortuna or Ferndale area, and that they just couldn't let it close down. Is that where they were going with that, or what was the reasoning put forth for expending this money for? I think people would say, well, it's horse racing. Why is that important? Why is it important?
Yeah, so I mean, the feeling is certainly of the Fair Association and folks who are intimately involved with the fair, is that the horse racing, the 2 weeks of horse racing is a real draw for the gates at the fair, and it really boosts attendance. And so that a fair without horse racing would get kind of a fraction of the attendance that it would with. And then horse racing, it's undisputable, brings in a lot of folks from outside of the area. Not just the jockeys and kind of their teams and their training teams, but there's kind of a whole infrastructure that travels with the horse racing circuit. And so I know Andy Titus, the president of the Fair Association, said, the fair itself brings in about $5 million of economic activity to the county that wouldn't otherwise be here. And the feeling is that a pretty significant percentage of that is tied to horse racing. So there's a real fear of what the fair might look like without racing. And so, yeah, that was really the points that were hammered in the supervisors meeting. I think there's also an unspoken fear that if the if the fair were to cancel horse racing for a year, that it would be really hard to get it back. The fair has fought for the better part of a decade now to kind of keep its claim on having races in what is a pretty competitive racing circuit. All of these horses and jockeys have various tracks vying for for their services and schedules. And so I think while it wasn't really directly spoken to in the meetings, I think that the Fair Association is really worried that if it loses any of its grip on the 2 weeks of horse racing that it has, that it would be really, really hard to get it back.
Now, was I given to understand that they will be able to use the stands once these emergency repairs are completed, or will they not be able to? I can't recall exactly what the article said.
Yeah, so if the repairs are done in time, they will be able to use the stands.
Okay.
Yeah, absolutely. There was some talk of fencing off the grandstands as another solution, but they felt like folks wouldn't turn out for the races if they couldn't sit in the stands.
Right.
So that would be viable. I mean, the question then is just it's not a permanent fix, and so then the county is going to have to look at kind of what to do to fix the structure for the long term.
And the county is the actual owner of the fairgrounds, are they not?
It is, yeah. It leases the fairgrounds, use of the fairgrounds to the Fair Association, which puts the Fair Association on the hook for like basic maintenance, upkeep, stuff like that. But this was considered, far beyond that.
Right. So it's not like the county is moving into a private facility and giving away free money. This is their facility to take care of.
Yes, and that was very much a point that First District Supervisor Rex Bone, said. It's like, this is our facility, and so we have some obligation to fix it and to make it available to these folks who we're leasing it to.
And so I didn't see this in the article, and maybe I skimmed over it, but is there like a go, no-go date in order to get this work done? Are they just going to work like crazy up until, because I can see where you would have horses and owners and jockeys and stuff that have to make a commitment to come up here, So, how will they know if there's going to be actual racing when they're not even sure if they can complete the work in time?
That is a very, very fair question, and it's one that nobody has publicly answered at this point.
I see.
The construction firm that they're looking at hiring has said that they believe they can get the work done in time and will do everything they can to meet those deadlines. But I can't stress enough how tight a timeline we're talking about. And as mentioned before, it's not as easy as catching a flight to the Arcata Eureka Airport and strolling up to the fair for these racing outfits.
That's right.
Move a lot of infrastructure with these horses and fit it into the rest of the schedules. And so I would imagine there's a real concern about even if this work is done on time, that the impacts it might have on folks signing up to race their horses at the fair.
I got you. All right. Well, I guess fingers crossed for us horse racing fans.
Yeah, and we'll report back as we know more.
Great. Well, Jennifer, let's move on to the arts and features beat. I don't know if this your story qualifies as the arts and features story, but
it's food.
Let's pretend that it does.
Boy, you're tough. So the Jefferson Community Center in Eureka is home to all kinds of stuff. I don't know if you've had a chance to look at their website and all of their offerings, but it is the location of, for one thing, some Wendy Chan fundraisers. If you were desperate to get a hold of some of her homemade chili sauce, occasionally she sells it out of there as a fundraiser and does meals and things. And there are other kind of community organization events that happen there, entertainment, all kinds of stuff. Also, there is a cafe. So I remember going in there and seeing this whole gutted area, and Hailey Benzanelli was like, "Oh yeah, this is gonna all be a cafe," and I was like, "Sure it is," but in fact it is now, and it looks great. There's a counter and a little deli case. There are espresso machines. There's a dining area. There's bar seating along the window so you can look out onto the street. It's really nice in there. And the J Cafe, as it is called, is open for, among other things, you can go in the morning, Monday through Thursday, and get coffee and espresso and things like that. and perhaps a muffin, depending on the offering of the day. And so that is paid. You go in and you pay for it, and that covers the cost of supplies and things like that. But in the afternoons all summer long, there's a free summer lunch program. So it's kind of cool because it's not just a free summer lunch program, it's a summer lunch program, and it's kind of a training program. The nearby Aldergrove School has a culinary class, and that it's a charter school, sorry. That is run by who teaches all kinds of line cook and chef stuff. Everything from like French mother sauces to like cleaning and all kinds of like basic kitchen maintenance and stuff like that. And the kids love it. And part of those classes is that you can work as an intern in the J Cafe. And during the year, that means doing, lunch service and things like that. But during the summer, it's just, and you get course credit. But during the summer, they have 2 interns that are working to provide these lunches when school is out. And this is kind of cool. It's a paid internship, and they are learning skills like, food storage, food safety. They have to get safe serve certificates to work in there. They end up with whatever license that is that the ABC gives out so that you can serve alcohol as long as it's not cocktails. You can serve alcohol in like a food place, so you can serve like beer and wine. And they learn all of this stuff that's like really basic, the kind of gut course in cooking that you need to work in an industrial kitchen or in a restaurant kitchen, any kind of, professional kitchen where normally you would just like start as a dishwasher and just grunt your way up through the ranks until you're a line cook. They're learning these skills at this level and getting paid over the summer to do it, which is very cool. I spoke to one of the interns who was exactly the kind of shy, shruggy 18-year-old that, how's this going? Good. Anyway, he's a very nice young man named Ian Rowley, and he's a very promising young cook. He's planning to go to CR in the fall and learn some business management stuff, and then go on to Oregon to a culinary school there, a school where he has previously gone for a competition, which he won, a burger competition, with his secret sauce, which he would not tell me what was in it.
That's because it's a secret.
I swear to God. The Youngs. He looked very shy, but he would not crack. But anyway, so that's a cool part of it, right? Is that the people cooking are learning a skill, and it's helping young people into a career. Yay. But also the kids who are being fed lunch, it's kind of wonderful. So the Department of Agriculture pays a certain amount of money, like funds school lunches all around. But what happens at the J Cafe and at the Jefferson Community Center in general is they have like a garden out back, and sometimes they give out free produce, but they are making like fresh, wonderful, balanced meals, not like sad, frozen. Yeah, you remember school lunch. It's not like that. It was the day I went, it was
mystery
fajitas.
meat. Mystery meat,
yeah.
I think they called it.
Yeah, there are no mysteries. And they're like whole grains and vegetables and all
there's
kinds
secrets,
of cool stuff.
though. There's secrets,
There
but
are
there's
secrets.
no mysteries.
Yeah, it's not a mystery like a health department mystery. So, but for some kids, school lunch is the most nutrition they're going to get in a day. So it's really vital. All the places that are providing summer lunches, and the J Cafe is one of the places that's doing it, and it's pretty cool.
Fabulous. Well, that's really great. Well, that is just about all the time. In fact, it's not only just about, but it is all the time we have for this week's edition of North Coast Journal Preview. The current edition of the North Coast Journal is out on newsstands now, despite all odds, and also available online 24/7 at northcoastjournal.com. Thad and Jen, thanks so much for doing the show, and we'll see you again next week.
Always
Thank
pleasure.
you, Matt.